Now, the Western method of writing history is what we call interpretive history. So if you read a Western history book, they don't bring you an eyewitness report and a chain of narrator. That's what they call primary source, right? They don't just bring you the primary sources. What they bring you is the historian has studied the primary sources, but he's going to give you a narrative. He's going to give you essentially an interpretation, his conclusion. Similar to what Suyuti is doing in that sort of summary. This is what the Western historian is doing, but they're not giving you the primary sources, right? Sometimes they may discuss some of the primary sources, but so we have to be very aware that the opinions of the historian are tied up within the telling of the history in this sense. Sometimes, they may have a very, very small primary source, and they may bring a lot of conclusions and interpretations from a very, very small, very limited evidence for what they are saying. Yeah. So it's important to be aware of that and always be very critical and questioning of that type of approach. There may often be many assumptions made and so on. Now, often it's not possible to know for sure what human motives have been. But if you read Western history generally, they often do assume a lot about motives, human motives, and what people were thinking. I'll just give you a quick example of that. Is, for example, when before Sayyidina Umar, the second Khalifa, died, he appointed a panel of 6 Sahaba, 6 of the leading Sahaba, and he said that they have to choose the next Khalifa amongst themselves, right? Now, they had 3 days, and they chose the next Khalifa would be Uthman, radiallahu anhu. Now, a Western historian may interpret that, the deliberations that went on, he may interpret that some of them had worldly motives, for example. Yeah, they might say, oh, they were fighting over Ali and Uthman were fighting over who would be the next Khalifa. But here they've made several assumptions. They've made an assumption that everyone is hungry for power. But what we actually know about people like Sayyidina Ali from a Muslim point of view is that they were not worldly people. They were not hungry for power and status. In fact, the opposite, they were very otherworldly. That's an example of how sometimes historians may make assumptions based on their own psychology and their own understanding of human psychology and behavior, which may not always be correct. Ultimately, 99% of the time, we don't know why historical people did what they did, unless they have explicitly written an autobiography or they've told people why they did what they did. And sometimes even then you can't be sure because they could be misleading, because most people who have written about their own biographies, autobiographies, they often want to paint a rosy picture, for example. Yeah. So we can't really be sure why people do what they do. So this is another reason why the Muslim approach was in some ways, so Tabari, he gives all of the eyewitness reports with the isnad. He doesn't make any comment of his own. He just says, this is what was witnessed, and this is who witnessed it, and this is the isnad. And that's all we're going to say. We're not going to try to understand why people did what they did, because it's beyond our, so in many ways, the Muslim historian approach was very, very scientific in that sense, very objective, I would say. Yeah. I'll give you an example of that, a little bit controversial, but it's worth mentioning. You probably know about the controversy about the satanic verses and what's his name, who wrote that book. His name's eluding me now. Salman Rushdie, right? It's probably before some of your time, but some of you probably remember that whole thing, yeah. I just mentioned because Tabari is one of the people who has those. There's certain narrations to do that have been called the satanic verses, yeah. Now the fact that Tabari narrates it doesn't mean he agrees with that it actually happened. Yeah, so most of the Sunni ulama, they reject those narrations. They say they're fabricated, they're not true, right? But Tabari still puts it in his book. And this is what I mean about our historians and our scholars. They even included narrations and eyewitness reports that they believe may not even be true or may be very weak, because they were just being objective. They were just including it there. Okay, inshallah, let's take our 5-minute break. And then it's 8:35, so inshallah we'll resume at 8:40 if people want to stretch their legs or take a quick break, inshallah.